Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest video discussion in the series of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for nearly 11 years now. I work within the regulatory standards and thought leadership part of the body, and as many people know, we're a large international standard setter and regulatory body with over 130,000 members. Now, our members work right across the globe, across the full property life cycle. They're working on land, in residential, in commercial, in alternative assets and infrastructure. So it's a very, very wide-ranging practice areas that our members work in, and thus the effect of data and technology is really profound and broad, and my job is to look at that and really highlight the kind of opportunities there are for our profession to take advantage of data and technology. And today I'm really, really happy to have Jax join me from Imfuna. So Jax, please join me on the call.
Good morning, Andrew. How are you?
I'm very well, very well, very well. Well, it's always good to before we kind of talk about the bits and the bytes and the technical side, to kind of bring alive the human side. So I always kind of tend to ask an initial question in terms of your backstory and the kind of origin story of Imfuna. So do give us a bit of a background on your journey and the journey of Imfuna.
Sure. I grew up in South Africa. I'm a mechanical engineer, and when I finished, I spent some years sailing around the world on a self-built sailboat and ended up in the United States. And interestingly, ended up in a unusual field of forensic engineering, which has to do with obviously investigating construction failures, material failures. And so Imfuna was really born out of this need for immutable data. Data that you could take to the bank or take to the court. And when it was built really for my own company, we have architects, engineers, and do a lot of investigation, building envelope technology, structural engineering, architectural. But in building it, we realized that there was a bigger market, and RICS is unique in the universe, that it really is a professional organization. And we started getting a lot of traction and interest in the UK. And so we're very happy to be a tech partner with this organization. It's, I think, a very nice fit for exactly the kind of things that we set out to do.
That's great. And it's become a bit of a cliche, I know, to ask a lot of our partners, given the recent events around the world. But what's your experience now with the state of the industry, kind of, perhaps we can use the phrase, hopefully post-COVID, but given the effects of the pandemic, what's it really done to the industry in terms of the way they have to manage buildings and as you say, actually, build immutable sets of data on buildings when there's been so many challenges around it?
Well, I think, Andrew, here we are sitting in our homes having a discussion. I think this is sort of the state of the industry, really, is we've seen this whole reassessment of building models. I think, organizations that had very formal ways of engaging in business and conducting business have had to rethink their entire business model. So there's decentralization and remote working environments, I think, are now the norm. There's also been this extraordinary resignations, people leaving because they're unhappy with the state of affairs or where they've been. And so there is this reassessment. And I think, as Paul Bagest, with RICS property standards, he talked about this well-being in the workplace. And I think this is a new mode and new direction where there's been an emphasis in technology and the acceleration of technology. And so from our view, we've seen a significant uptick where people have come to recognize how helpful it is to have technology or a digital base that can readily be spread, it can readily be managed remotely, and you don't need that centralization anymore.
So have you seen that the various stakeholders and customers you deal with have really understood now how technology matters and how it can actually be applied? Because once again, it's become a bit of a cliche that the pandemic has kind of accelerated perhaps trends that were there, but people have been to some extent forced to adopt these things, but now realize actually that there's a huge opportunity here with technology.
Yes, again, I think, Andrew, this pandemic really has brought to focus something that obviously in the world of digitization and various technologies such as BIM and other technologies, and certainly people have recognized, that there's these improved processes There's the efficiency, reliability. It's also about data accessibility. That is, you can be remote and have access to all the information you need or create the information. And I think there's also this looking at improving standards, improving the mobility, in the RICS, for example, it's important for the ability to be audited, to have that kind of record. So I think in terms of, for example, I noticed the digital transformation that Kay Pittman talked about at RICS is very, very on point. And I think also, with the panels at RICS, where I think there was a publication on the RICS with the panel of 6 professionals that had a really interesting survey exactly about how surveyors have become commoditized, which is a good thing, because the rote tasks that surveyors and professionals in the field go away, because it allows people to do the things they're good at. They do the things that their profession is about, and takes away those mundane tasks. So I think the technology really is a big impact on the industry for good reasons and for the right reasons.
And how do you see that sort of that combination of standards and technology? Because I guess one of the dangers with technology is you just get lots of different systems that don't talk to each other, that sometimes don't perhaps understand the importance of professional standards. How do you see standards in your area of the sector helping?
So I think, and maybe Andrew, I could share a couple quick slides on this, and because I think in the first instance, if we look at the sort of the efficiencies in terms of what we're looking at, and let me just go. So in the first instance, we've done significant testing, and we have a huge number of users globally. And so these sort of statistics that I present really give you a sense of where the time saving is. And if you look at the sort of genesis of a typical inspection, whether it is in the residential market, on the commercial market, or building technology, there's time spent inspection, transcribing, reviewing, generating reports. And so these time savings, you can see the biggest time savings in the transcription, in the reviewing, all very important elements. And then in terms of generating a report, so the idea that all this information ends up in the right place, in the right buckets, in a database, really delivers something that is important. But if we look at this idea, RICS obviously has some really well developed and well proven standards. And in this universe where we have sort of a mobile inspection with the process, some of these benefits really are not only the savings in time, but how it unifies data, standardizes the data capture, and then it automates the reporting. It allows also that it's recognized, for example, RICS has certain professional reports that are the standards, but it also allows users that have their own sort of bent or their own specific needs. There's an adaptable component. And so, and then finally, of course, with the standards, is it's really important, the ability to access records. And again, in the cloud environment, this is sort of a very easy and recognizable way to set up. But the challenges really are, I think, at the end of the day, I think when we look at the panel, I believe one of the panelists, Anthony Waller with the RICS, talked about the challenge of sticking with standards. Well, in the digital universe, these can become much more focused and readily and unified.
So, I mean, that's covered a lot of ground there in a great way in terms of understanding how important standards are. And I always think that particular piece around, getting data into a structured form so it can be shared, with other systems, and that you can begin to drive sort of analytics from it. Be interesting to understand the kind of the range of ways people are using your solution, because clearly, looking at building pathology, and as you said, that need for immutable data with quite specific use cases. Can you talk us through the kind of areas where people are actually adopting this and the kind of value that you're getting? Because clearly you showed some impressive productivity there, but can you talk us through kind of some kind of user stories?
Yes, so I think in the for the users, so there are a number of ways in which the data is structured, really, and so I think in the first instance, the quality of reports, the professionalism of those, the business referrals, the repeat business. So in other words, once you start establishing your brand, establishing the kind of data that you want to deliver in the way you deliver it, it still fits within that framework of the RICS guidelines. And for members that participate, it really allows them to do the things that makes them unique, that presents them with a unique opportunity, that allows them to adapt the very things that they're used to. And you'd have to acknowledge, Andrew, I think, many of the users come from what I call the paper and pen and camera background. And for this is a very new universe because you're walking around with a tiny device. It's a little phone. And suddenly that phone is your entire office. And it's a remarkable transformation. So, I think the other part is this repeatability. The ability to know that not only are you applying standards, but you're compliant with the standards, but you're also creating branding, and then in our universe, from one of the user feedbacks, sort of, if I could share this slide, we have this, importance of the ability to do this reinspection and so part of this journey for our users and is from user feedback is it's a diagnostic tool. So we think of this in terms of what's the initial data set. Are there periodic, like in construction, for example, are there periodic updates to that information? Do you need to compare information over time? And then do you have the ability to go back and revisit or reinspect? So all these are important feedback or touch points that our users have given us. And then, of course, there are the derivative reports. And that, again, this was not something we originally had built into our software, but in users, they wanted, for example, they'd say, in my practice, we typically do building envelope evaluations. But from that, we need to be able to extract information that goes to different parties. For example, some data may go to the architect, some data may go to the project manager. And so these are derivative reports. And so again, building this into the software is really a sort of a feedback from users in a good way in which we progress, the software.
And it's interesting that when you were showing that slide, that there's now this sort of concept of almost a timeline approach, where rather than just taking a snapshot, you have that ability to track an asset over time and look at that sort of comparison, which I think is an important use of technology, which perhaps has only been enabled by having this kind of technology. One thing that's always interesting is the fact that firms often want to have their own kind of template, sort of look and feel of output, or perhaps indeed when it comes to the data collection, their own kind of flow through. How do you support that kind of that combination of almost off the shelf, but at the same time that ability for people to customize, because that's often a tension, isn't it, between wanting to provide a solution and then at the same time give that level of flexibility for different kinds of surveys, for different kinds of output that a surveying practice may feel gives them a particular kind of voice or kind of impression when they're giving output.
Yes, I think for us it sort of starts with what we call this user interface. So you start off with putting out something that's usable to you and you think this is fabulous, but then you get a whole lot of feedback and people do things that you can't imagine. And you're like, why on earth? But then it does make sense. And it's, you think about, why would somebody want to do this? But it's a real problem. We look at them, we evaluate them, But in the bigger picture, it really is about matching the professional skills or the professional standards, having the flexibility to address that. That's really the key. And the user interface really is about making it so I'm a strong advocate for not having to spend time on the screen staring at your device. To me, the purpose of being in the environment is to observe, is to be able to spend your eyes on what's important and not looking at your device. So the whole workflow process is one of have the device, do the work you're supposed to do, use it as a tool, and have a logical workflow. Hopefully it solves the problem that you're trying to solve, which is different for different people. But the general workflow is capturing information in a methodical, reasonable way, having edit functions, having useful features, for example, dictation or photo markups, or bringing drawings into the app, marking those up, doing 3D scans, for example, so you don't have to spend time in a room. These are sort of features that we pay attention to, because they're features that are easily used and readily available and don't take away from the workflow. So I think we look at the efficiency of that. We look at the the workflow pattern, and perhaps I have a slide. Maybe I could just share.
Yeah,
yeah, and let's have a look on this. So if we look at so in terms of the market that we serve, it really is a very broad market, and every one of them has a slightly different need, whether it's a property manager, letting agent, inventory clerk, surveyors, and so on. Every one of them, we have users or customers all in this realm. And of course, you'll notice, Andrew, the bottom right is the expert witness. So sort of I started in that realm, and then obvious architects, engineers, but the functionality within each of those has to be adaptable, has to be adopted in a way that makes sense. And then, if we look at sort of this is a somewhat simplified view. If someone walks into a property, there are a lot of things that you just need to capture in a very logical and sensible way with ease. And the real idea is you want this done, and this is a sort of a workflow that how we see the functionality of a report workflow. So it starts off in the preliminary research, and we have this idea of templating. Now, templating maybe, for example, could be an RICS level 1, 2, or 3 report, as an example, but it could also be a testing protocol, like a BS standard or an ASTM standard or something like that. And then you have document review. So a user can take those templates, make them match exactly their business need, upload it into the mobile device. Then they have the information for field inspection. Once they upload it, they have also the transcription. So we don't want people spending time with their big fingers pressing little keys. They can just dictate it and gets transcribed. And then it ends up in this universe of the remote. This is a cloud-based server. So the hardest part, candidly, is having users understand the API. So API is a way in which data from the Imfuna cloud server can go into systems that people may be familiar with or have set up. And they could be, for example, something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet or a database like FileMaker or XML, or many already have their own computer systems, and they need all this data to enter into their system for which they can then use. So I think, Andrew, this to us is really sort of the overarching goal in serving many different professionals, but the workflow, I think, is consistent across that.
And as you say, you've showed that kind of interoperability, which I think is key, because I think one of the critiques of many kind of data and technology solutions in the built environment is the fact that they perhaps stand alone and don't have that ability to talk to other systems. You talked about those derivative reports for other stakeholders, but also that fact that you need to get that data perhaps into other systems, which are then perhaps best of breed for reporting or analytics or presentation. So yeah, I suppose that's a key thing about making sure that you can feed into other systems.
And I think, yeah, that's right, Andrew. I think, we have to acknowledge, even within RICS, there's a broad range of professional services that are offered. And so we want to make sure, however they start, they're able to create just that which they need. They can then upload that into their own accounts, and they can deal with it and follow work processes they may be more familiar with or comfortable with, quite candidly. We simply can't take people away from Excel spreadsheets, and it's probably not a good reason to, because if that's what somebody's comfortable with and good at, it's a good way to go. And so, I think, and then the important, I think, of what we've been talking about is the sort of user feedback. It's about open communications, having the right sort of support, for people, so that when they get stuck or they have a problem. And I think it's really important to acknowledge, again, sometimes what we see as crazy requests, for, I want to do this. And say, well, let's look at that and let's see if there's a way we can make that work. And that's important. And then, of course, the last piece that really is the changes in regulations. There is this constant move of regulations or revisions, updates. And so it's really good for us to be current, stay with that, so that our users are really dealing with the latest or the greatest, whatever's in the industry.
Indeed. And it's a question I often ask of our partners, because so many of our members in our RICS do work in smaller practices, either as sole practitioners or as, say, in smaller practices. And obviously for them, in many ways, this kind of move to cloud-based solutions is great, because it means they don't have to buy hardware. As you say, they can use their mobile phones as the device. But I guess the challenge for a lot of them is almost the kind of, how do they go around that due diligence of looking at the various offerings out there and saying, well, actually, what's best for me? So if we try to help them become this intelligent client when they look at the variation of solutions out there, what sort of questions should they be asking? What sort of things should they be looking for to make sure that they, to use the phrase, future-proof themselves and get the kind of flexibility, but also that off-the-shelf reliability that they need?
Yes, yeah, I think there are obvious in trying to. It's a confounding world. First of all, there are many apps and many technologies, and I think it's very confusing to see, well, what makes this work. People have, for example, BIM models, and those tend to be in higher level, very well-funded projects. That doesn't represent the universe of the profession. And while it's very attractive and obviously very beneficial, it doesn't solve a problem for most users. So, but if we look at the steps, I think first and foremost, to assess your business needs. What is it that your business needs? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? What are the key things that you're looking for that you would expect to find in a tech solution? I think you look at the functions and the features, and does it meet with professional standards or the kind of standards that you would need to apply? Does it address liability? Does it address exposure? Does it help you with that? Does it put you in line with professional requirements, for example, record keeping, auditability? Does it have the technical support that is important? Is it scalable? In other words, I might be a one-person operation, or I might have 10 people, I might have 100 people. Can I be 1,000 people? There are the admin functions, like do you have control over who does what, how? So you end up that your records are secure, that you are GDPR compliant, that you meet ISO standards. Then there is the marketing aspect. Is can you be branded, or are you going to stuck with a little shoebox that looks like everyone else's shoebox? And then the important is the training. Does it offer training? Does it have CPDs consistent with industry standard? And I think, you look to like RICS. With what I love about this program, that RICS has taken the time to look at, like ourselves and other providers, what are these technologies and how do they support this professional organization moving forward? We've moved out of the last century. How is it going forward? And I think that's an important aspect. And, if I sort of look at just perhaps some of the sort of models of the kind of things that, we would consider. So just very briefly, sort of a graphic. This is sort of a range. I mean, this is, for example, the top left photo is a window performance test. So this is a very specific scientific protocol. And it's important that if that's what you're doing, can the software solution complete that form in a way that it meets all those requirements and can be published immediately with that test data? Or if we have in the commercial environment, sometimes we have people that have hotels or commercial installations, and they have not only an inventory requirement, but they have a assessment of safety and so on. Or we have new construction, work in progress that needs to be measured, or things like checklists or so on. And what I'm sharing with you right now is a sort of example of a bespoke template. So we talked a little bit about that. And here is an example where you can have a whole series of fields and you can add all these notes. So it becomes very specific. What area are you doing? What are you looking at? A series of bespoke observations that may match your inventory or your reporting. Or if we move into the, for example, here the next slide, I've given you this example of a template where it's a building facade, and you have a whole series of actionable items that can feed into a work order or go to a specific trade or whatever the direction is. So there is tremendous in making these selection. I think I would strongly recommend looking at the total workflow and what you hope to achieve, and will it, at the end of the day, will it create significant savings? Will it unify your process? Will it standardize your data capture so you don't have different reports from different people? Does it automate the sort of tedious task of report collecting, which of course drives everyone crazy? And then is it recognized? Is it a recognized product? And does it represent a professional organization? And then is it adaptable? And then finally, does it create for you a very easily accessible history?
And I suppose in some respects, a question that's perhaps hard to judge with a lot of suppliers unless you really get, really talk to them, is that feedback loop that you've talked about, the fact that actually that the solution is continuing to evolve based on that market feedback. Because I think a critique that can be leveled at certain kind of data and tech firms in this space is that they build solutions looking for a problem, and that they don't have that continuing dialogue with the marketplace. Whereas you said, Jax, you sometimes get requests that on the face of it seem mad, but actually do reflect the real world, and they reflect what surveyors have to do.
Exactly, and I mean, we've had people say, "Oh, well, we do, party wall inspections." Well, that's fine. There's nothing unusual about that. But what are the unique things? Well, there are certain certifications we need to meet, or there are certain standards we need to meet. Can we bring those in? And that's an important feedback. Yes, and how do we do that? Is there something unique? And candidly, the idea, for example, can I bring in? I need to bring in plans and drawings. It's very important for me to be able to designate the areas that I'm working in. Now, that may be useful to a small subset of users, but it's an important feature and a helpful one. And I think these are sort of broader goals in an industry where you're trying to not find the problems, but find solutions that come back from users. And we have, for example, a user that does seismic retrofits on historical buildings. And they have a very unique business model where they have providers. They have the technology and the hardware, and then they have these suppliers throughout the UK. And what they need is a feedback loop, that the solution that is being bid and then in the proposal and then executed is picking the right hardware according to their engineering criteria. They need a quality control aspect. They need an assurance that it's the right solution. They want to make sure that they're not doing something that creates liability for them. And then the user needs in the field to be able to document that and send it back to the suppliers and say, we've done exactly what you've told us, and here it is. Here's the proof. Now, that you would never think of that as a sort of problem, but it's a unique application.
Indeed. So, Jax, a final question to sort of get your sort of crystal ball out. What do you think that the future holds in terms of additional ways that technology can help? Because obviously we've made great strides over the last decade or so in terms of these kind of solutions. But what do you think are the next opportunities for technology to augment what surveyors do?
Well, I think as a sort of foundational building block, I think one is, whatever the technology going forward, it needs to make the mundane and the sort of boring tasks go away. And it needs to bring professionals to do the very thing they really trained for and are good at. That's analytics, creating value in terms of knowledge, in creating value in terms of the respect that they gain or garner because of that. But I think there is going to be, the important piece, I think, is that we see a strong direction where you're able to tie together different technologies. For example, we talked a little bit about BIM as an example.
Yeah.
There are many users that are not in that universe, but the question really is, at some point, do they have to interface with that? Or in building management systems, for example, there's some very sophisticated software programs that allow people to manage buildings, health and safety controls, fire safety, and so on. And so we're seeing we have a tremendous number of these APIs, again, a way in which there is still an inspection element or a documentation element, but it needs to end up in another record. And I think my projection for the future is we're going to see more of that specialization, but also integration in a way that makes it really easy and useful and beneficial to the industry in its entirety.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, Jax, as ever. So for today, thanks for your time, and it's been very, very interesting, and I look forward to catching up with you in the future.
Well, and I thought, Andrew, we'd end up with a little slide for you that as I was let me roll to the back here. Whoop, sorry. And here we go. And I thought, we'd end with a little bit of the work in progress in London, with the MI6 building and the major construction, and of course, ducks to water.
Indeed. Well, once again, thanks as ever for your time, Jax, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you, Andrew.